Hi, everyone. Hi, Alex, and everyone else. Thank you so much for tuning in and sharing your lunch break with us. I'm Valerie Leisten, project manager at the charity Media Trust, leading our climate communications program. Media Trust is a charity that works in partnership with the media and the creative industry to give charities, young people, and underrepresented talents a stronger voice. I've been leading our climate communications program over the past year now, and have worked with diverse charities who use diverse methods to communicate with their followers, with their audience. But what I've seen is that they do have one thing in common. All of them send out newsletters. So today we'll have the wonderful Alex Fearon explain why you should or should not kill the newsletter. Alex is the founder, director, and storyteller behind Maybe Later. She creates email marketing strategies and campaigns for purpose-driven organizations that build communities, make money, and drive change. In her presentation, she will help us understand what we might have been doing wrong in our email newsletter communication and how we can do it better. It's going to be an interactive session, so I do encourage you to write in the chat and also post your questions in our Q&A section. And we'll try to get to as many as we can after Alex's presentation. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you so much, Valerie, and thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. So today's session is called Kill the Newsletter, why our approach to email is all wrong and how to get it right. I could feel like I can skip over the intro because Valerie did such a great job. I think the main kind of takeaway is that I am a massive email strategy nerd. So throw in your questions in the Q&A and we'll get to them at the end. So all of the speakers at this conference have something of real value to share, and implementing them will help you become a better communicator. But you can't do it all. And so before we get going, I really want to make the case for the humble little email. So the first point is kind of the ROI of email, and specifically kind of for stewardship. So it's 80% more for automated stewardship than sporadic one-off emails, which is just a mind-blowing fact. Then the second is the death of cookies. So the first kind of phase out of cookies for Gmail users is going to happen in Q1 of next year. And Gmail has said that it's going to phase them out completely by the end of 2024. And I think other browsers are going to follow. And this means that as organizations, we really have to focus on building our own first-party data sets and strategies. Also, social media is incredibly unstable at the moment. Think about what's happened to Twitter, X, over the last kind of 6 months. Instagram the year before that. And the question I always ask everyone is, if your social media pages disappeared tomorrow, what state is your email community, your email list in to mobilize and to really engage your supporters? Then the third, I firmly believe that email, if you do it right, especially kind of if you use automation, really protects and increases your team's capacity. And I think we need to be doing everything that we can right now as a sector to prevent burnout and really acknowledge that our departments, our teams are made up of humans who cannot run at 100% all of that time. And automations help give that 100% to your supporters, to your community, even when maybe you can't. And that increased capacity also really creates room to test and play, both within email, but also kind of within your other channels. Then kind of the last reason why I think you need to invest more in email and make this kind of top of your to-do list is the data. Like the data that you can get with email marketing is so incredibly rich. And I think it's some of the best that you can get in, or especially in kind of organic digital marketing. And investing in email means that you can really create kind of capacity to analyze that data and create better comms, and ultimately build stronger communities and relationships and create more change out in the real world beyond just what we're doing kind of online, which is why we exist, right? So there's one word in this session title that has really pigeon-toed us as organizations, and that's newsletter. If there's anyone watching that's in bird conservation, please tell me why pigeon toe is a thing. Drop it in. But like that word newsletter, it's created a very narrow definition of what we think our emails are allowed to be in our organizations and within our kind of our comms plans. And I think it really perpetuates this idea that email marketing is kind of old and kind of boring, which is why it's bottom of our to-do lists so often. When actually, based on what I've just chatted about now, we know that it's one of the richest kind of data sources and community building tools that we have available to us right now. But in order to get our emails right, we really need to know where we're going wrong. And so I thought we should do something a little bit different. And before we do the Q&A, play a little bit of a game called Blunder Bingo. If you've got a notepad and a pencil, make a little note, play along in real time if you think your email program fits within any of these. So in my 10 years kind of email marketing, I see a lot of organizations make the same mistakes, the same blunders time and time again. And that first one is what I've called one size fits all. So emailing everyone the exact same content. We talk so much kind of about supported journeys and that in our work and in the sector. And then for whatever reason, expect everyone to be at the same point in a journey with us, which means that we're sending everyone the exact same emails, the exact same newsletters. And I genuinely believe that segmentation and personalization is generally your biggest email marketing asset. And that's kind of what brings and creates that real ROI for your organization. Then out of the woodwork, I know it's your lunch break, so I've been a little tricksy so that you didn't read ahead and think that you knew exactly what I was going to say for each of these blunder bingos. I've been a little vague on purpose so that you've got to pay attention, you've got to look up, put your phone down. And that out of the woodwork refers to like organizations that only send kind of a quarterly newsletter or something that's like really sporadic but not very often. So you kind of just like creep out every now and again to engage with your supporters. And here's why it's so incredibly important to increase your email frequency. Like, let's say that you send a monthly email and newsletter. So 12 times a year, you get in touch with your community on average. And you have an above average open rate of 30%. That means that you're only speaking to some of your subscribers 3, 4 times a year. And that's really not enough to build a relationship with, to get them to be really involved and committed to what you do as an organization. And so, we think, oh, email doesn't work, it's so much effort, the ROI doesn't work. But when you really if you mapped it out onto a calendar and you saw how much you were interacting with people, you'd think, oh, well, it kind of makes sense that potentially, our email is generating the ROI that it is. Then the third is this limited kind of data collection piece. And I think very often we just kind of collect a name, which obviously is really important. If you're not collecting a name, like for example on your website and your pop-up, make sure that you are, so that you can personalize a bit more. But often also the only other data points that sometimes we see in organizations, let's say, for example, if you've got a fundraising department, is that reason for giving. So when you go and fill in that form. And that is great. And you should be using that reason for giving to kind of build into your segmented comms. But I would love to see more organizations collect more data, like really take the time to find out what people are interested in, what problems do they have that you can help them solve with. One of the great things about email is that it makes it so easy for us to slowly collect these additional kind of data points over time. And it creates better content experiences for our readers. It helps us plan campaign messaging. And it takes email from being something that you just kind of send some updates on a couple of times a month to a real kind of strategic part of your marketing strategy and of your comms plan. Then stories from one voice. Tick this if you only ever kind of send emails from your CEOs or your heads of. This really makes people bored over time. Like, we want to be intrigued. We want to, when we're going through our inboxes, which are really busy and overcrowded spaces, you want to see something that makes you go, oh, like, who is that? Where's that from? And just create that little moment to kind of to pause and engage people in that way. And then the next one is, and I love this, kind of like acting like you're on stage. So some emails, like some movement building emails, should read like you're stood on stage at Wembley Stadium. But most of the time, like, your email is it's a one-to-one communication. Just because it's a mass channel, like, and it works a bit different to social media in that way. Like, often we can hop onto different digital channels and really address our community as a whole, but email is different. And I think sometimes, as busy communicators, I think we sometimes forget to really imagine the environment that our readers are kind of engaging with our emails in. And it's a one-to-one chat. Make it personal, make it read like I'm having a conversation. I'm sharing something with just you. Then we've got the cold shoulder, which is that you don't send an automated welcome email. So your automated welcome email, when, let's say, someone goes to join your email list or fills in something to download a resource or make a donation, whatever it might be, that automatic email, 75% of people expect to get one. Like, that means that you've got this really rare moment in your inbox where someone is literally waiting to hear from you. And that email will probably have one of the highest open rates and the highest click-through rates out of all of the emails that you might ever send. And when someone goes and takes that action, goes and signs up, they're excited, or whatever that, or they're passionate, they're angry, they're unsure, whatever that emotion is that we're trying to cultivate from people from that other platform. Like, they've got it, they're ready, and they do not care about our in-house data processes and sign-off flow and moving things from a data team to a this to a that. Like, they want to hear from you. And when they don't, and you kind of show up 4 weeks, 6 weeks later, because that's like when they drop into your normal kind of newsletter schedule, most of the time, like, that fire that they had for your organization, for your cause, like, it's been dampened. And so it's more difficult to rebuild it up within this particular channel. Then the next one is data clinging. So you're going to tick this one if you've never run a re-engagement campaign, and you don't kind of archive inactive subscribers. In our sector, like, we love file size. We love to be able to brag, to say, like, we've got 20,000 people on our email lists. But if you are clinging onto those unengaged subscribers, like, that can really harm your email data and your email deliverability over time. And it could mean that people who are engaged and waiting to hear from you don't, because your sender reputation has been damaged. And so it's really important. And I think, this is what takes your email marketing strategy from like beyond just copywriting and key messaging. It's richer, it is a bit more complicated than that. And that database management piece and looking after those subscribers and those readers really has to be part of your strategy to make it work for you as an organization. And then time warping, which is, how long does it take for your email to be approved? If your email sign-off process is days, like it's a blunder. So much of what our communication is right now as organizations has to do with things that are happening like right now. Like if we think about the cabinet reshuffle, if you can only get sign off for an email on Thursday, but that no one really opens emails on Friday, and then you send it next Tuesday, like that cycle's moved on. And I think email, because it is slightly more long form, a lot of organizations, that sign off process is a little bit longer. And I think it's like such an amazing thing to be able to optimize and get right within your comms teams and your organizations to really shorten that process, because I think it means that you can stand out, you can be in people's inboxes with information, with really timely information, when a lot of other organizations and maybe other voices kind of within the public sector in the space aren't. And then kind of the last one is shrunk in the wash. And that's all about churn, right? And it's incredibly normal for our email databases to churn. But when we don't pay close enough attention to how we're really going to continue to grow our email community and keep the people who we've got kind of really engaged, if we don't pay attention to that, all of the other blunders don't really matter, because then we've got no one to email, right? And it really requires that kind of that cross-channel approach. And it's one of the things that I'm loving kind of out from kind of environmental organizations and communicators, is finding really unique ways to bring people onto kind of our email lists and our spaces. And I think there's also, there's a lot that we can learn from for-profit brands in the space, because I do think they are incredibly aware of kind of how important that list growth piece is. So we know what the blunders are. So what can we do to kind of get it right? What can we do to bring that new email energy kind of into our organizations? So I've got five tips. So the first one is really being about kind of being audience-led from the get-go, from the very beginning. Like, use your welcome journey as the ultimate tool to collect information about who your readers are and slowly kind of build engagement. Then the second one is email more often. Emailing more doesn't mean me emailing everyone more often all of the time. Again, this is where like segmentation really is your best friend. And I think we've got to sometimes, step away from this mindset of, well, if we're only emailing, 10% of our subscription base about this particular topic, is it worth the time? But if 90% of that 10% engage, take an action, and we can replicate that, a couple of times throughout the year, I think email starts to play a much bigger role in how we take what we're doing online in our communications into kind of the real world. Then the third one, and this is like one of my favorites, is to really play with the newsletter format. So one of the things that I often do with a lot of organizations is, the first thing I say is stop calling it a newsletter, because it's like pigeon-toeing us, it means that we we have already, if I say newsletter, right, everyone here pretty much has the same format that immediately kind of comes to mind. And so it's, how does it change how you can show up week after week if you call them community building emails, just your weekly email? And really start to play with the format. So it can be anything from kind of using plain text and making it really feel like personal, to maybe kind of like a single topic newsletter. If you ever kind of feel stuck, one of the things that I find really helpful is just remembering, and this is if you like newsletter, like it's buried like so deep within our brains, if it pops up letter first, news second, and just think about like it's a relationship building tool. And sometimes, yes, we need news, we need fact, like that's what, but not all of our emails on our email program are about that. Which kind of brings me on to my fourth point, and this is like one of my most favorite kind of tools and frameworks to create content from. I use empathy mapping for every single email that I write. Like before I start, I literally ask myself, what do I want my readers to think, know, feel, and do within this particular email? And, sometimes there might not be an action for all of them, but what is important to remember here with email is our inboxes, they have almost like their own kind of algorithms, like social. We just don't really talk about them in the same kind of way. And after our emails have passed like authentication protocols and spam filters, inbox providers like Gmail and Outlook have a look at our data set as a whole, our whole bunch of subscribers, and they look at like spam complaints, unsubscribes. There's a negative actions that give or kind of make suggestions around kind of the quality of our content. But then they also really look at positive actions that readers take in our emails. And that's replying to emails and then clicking on emails. And that's another reason why that do piece really focuses and shifts our attention away from open rates and onto kind of that action piece. And if you are also, if you kind of feel like this has to be a multi-topic email, we've got like 7 things that we need to tell people, go and run through this framework first and see if you can pinpoint kind of clear thoughts, feelings, and actions from giving people loads of information. Sometimes you can, and sometimes that some of your readers will only read kind of the first half, some will read all the way through. But if it starts to feel really muddy to you and you engage with this kind of stuff all the time, you know the message and you know what it means, how does it feel to your readers, to your supporters, to your community? And then the last kind of top tip is to like really leverage the inbox experience. So what you share and the impression that you make in the actual inbox before anyone even opens anything really counts for a lot. And it is what helps encourage people to open your emails. And it's often an afterthought because we focus so much on what's on the inside because we really want to make sure that like it has maximum value and packs a punch. But if we can take a little bit of time to look at our sender name, our subject line, our preview text, and what that looks like in actual inboxes, and not just kind of Outlook, because that's what we use for work, or, whatever it might be, I think, it starts to create kind of a much richer experience for our readers, but also gives us more that we can test with and play with. And that's another great thing kind of about email. It makes kind of A/B testing and learning and optimizing so much simpler than kind of a lot of platforms. So it was like a real kind of like whistle stop tour of what we're doing wrong and what we need to do right. Before we do Q&A, in the resources section, there is a quiz that I've created. And it's basically for if you're not sure where your next kind of area of focus needs to be within your email marketing program, fill out this quiz, you do subscribe to join my newsletter, but then you get given literally a couple of points of what you need to focus on for kind of the next 90 days. And it takes all of this, which can like feel like a lot and a little bit overwhelming, and turns it into something that's like a lot simpler and easier to tackle. So that's that. How's the Q&A looking? How are you, Valerie?
Good. Wow. I mean, first of all, I've learned so much. So thank you for these like great tips. I've realized the things I might be doing wrong and how I could make them better. Yeah, we have a few questions. So let me start with Jennifer. She's saying, my fear with email frequency is being considered as spam or bothersome as we compete with other content shared with our readers from other organizations. How do we find the balance between too much and too little?
Really good question. The most annoying part of my job is telling people to test stuff. I think a really good place to start is create a segment within your email marketing platform of your really, really engaged subscribers. So like the people who open absolutely everything, and ask them if they prefer like something that's a little bit meatier once or twice a month, or if they'd actually want things that are like shorter and bite-sized, because those are the number one, then you're actually getting like community feedback and kind of you're being audience led. And I also think it creates like a really good foundation to, number one, find more subscribers and readers who are like that, but also think about how you can potentially increase your frequency with other readers. But yeah, it is really just kind of like a case of it's a bit of testing.
Mm-hmm. So definitely not easy. And maybe tapping into the frequency. Laura was asking, would you say monthly is optimum? And is there an optimum in email length, word count? Yeah.
So optimum frequency, again, this really depends on what your emails are about and who is in your audience. So I think we're often really clear on what we want our community building emails, our newsletters to do for us as organizations, but what do our readers expect and think they're going to get from being part of that space? And that, I think, helps us create a content plan that meets those kind of external kind of expectations. I'm trying to kind of think of some examples where one of the newsletters that I follow, they only send out an email kind of like maybe every 60 days because it's a summary of policy change. And that suits me just fine because I know that that's what I want it to be for. I don't want loads of like bit emails. Whereas if it was something different, you know, I might prefer it to be shorter and more frequent. And in terms of kind of word count, I think a lot of it is about that initial impression and hook that you have with the reader. So there's like a study that's come out quite recently where it says that you've got 7 seconds to hook someone's attention in an email. And so it's, again, how are we formatting those emails? What do they look like on mobile? And what's the hook for kind of getting people to read more? Another thing to take into consideration as well is that a lot of people, if they're reading on their mobiles, I don't know if you do this, we before I commit, I want to see how long it is, because I don't want to get halfway or what I perceive to be halfway and then it's really, really long. So we do this thing on our phone. So we do this and we have a quick look and then we decide. So there's loads of like blocks of text that it might not work for you. So it's that initial hook and then making sure that it's not really, really long. And I also think, again, that sending test emails to inboxes is really important. So like, for example, Gmail will, and I'm sure like we'll have this in our personal inboxes as well, like emails get clipped because they're so long and you have to like click a little button that says like view entire message or it opens up another thing. And so make sure that how like that preview process and what that is like, kind of looks like in an inbox is Optimum really.
So I guess when it comes to the length, it's like important to like catch someone's attention, like the 7 seconds. Yeah, try to get your message for someone who can read that in 7 seconds.
Yeah.
Poppy is asking, what would you say is the single most important thing from the blunder bingo to focus on? An example, if you're lacking in staff resource, where should we put the effort?
I would say your automated welcome journey, because you're making the most of that kind of like that interest level, but depending on how you write it, you can set them up in a way that, you know, it doesn't have to be 5 emails in 5 days. You can really kind of spread it out and think about what actions you want people to potentially take in those emails. And so you know that you're doing that community building and that stewardship piece when you're busy kind of doing other things. So I would say like make that the focus. And then if your kind of email marketing community has been around for a little while, my next thing would be that re-engagement campaign and that data cleaning piece, because that you want to protect your email data and kind of keep it in good nick really.
Okay. This is an interesting one. What would you suggest doing instead of automated welcome email?
Oh, instead of like in,
because I guess you do want to be like engaging or like a little like a bit personal, but like how can you do that?
This is a really interesting question. I feel like maybe it's around that other voices piece, and to not kind of treat it as that welcome, like with a marketing lens on, really think about it as like a one-to-one like stewardship touch point is maybe what I would do instead. I think like this is where my email data nerdiness really shows, because I'm like, but you have to do something with them. You like, it's a bit of a waste if you've worked really hard to get those subscribers and then you just only contact them when you've got something to say, which might like be months in the future, whatever it might be.
And maybe when it comes to the welcome email, I remember signing up to a newsletter where they also asked, it was actually, I think, a petition organization where they asked like a few questions also, like why.
Yeah.
And then the email I got back was like quite personal, like responding to the call.
Yeah. So that, like, I love that approach because it literally combines all of the things that I think work best in email. So a lot of platforms either integrate really well with a survey tool like Typeforms, SurveyMonkey, MailChimp has their own like inbuilt survey functionality. And so it makes it really easy to collect that information. You can automatically tag your subscribers based on what their responses are, and then you can build out those segmented journeys. And I think like it's, for me, like when you answer those questions and you get an email back as a supporter and you go, oh, I feel like they listened to me and they really get me, like that's what that segmentation piece is kind of all about.
Yeah. And speaking about segmenting, Anjali is asking, what size does your mailing list have to be for segmentation? Yeah, to be good use of time, sorry.
This is a tricky one. I think it has to relate to like organizational capacity and goals. A lot of strategists might tell you that it needs to kind of be at least kind of a couple of thousand, but I don't think that it has to be that big. It's more about what you're segmenting and what you're asking them to do in that particular email. And kind of what this is also kind of, I think, where kind of your goal setting and your KPIs for campaigns as a whole is really important. And understanding kind of what that conversion rate for email is for your organization. So, you know, if let's say, for example, you built a segment and it was of 50 supporters, but you get the messaging right, you get the targeting right, you can have a conversion rate, of 80%. Yes, it's small, but what that then does is it kind of forces you to think about how you can grow that segment, find more of those kind of people in other spaces and channels. So then, yes, it's small. Yes, it might be a little bit labor intensive a couple of times a year, but I think it helps you find or kind of build your community with the right kind of people, and people who you can kind of take on a bit of a journey.
And I guess segmenting your audience is always important, like kind of trying to understand your audience a bit better. So even if the number is low, I think it's always still worth it to do that. How interesting. Laura is asking, is there any data around preferred sender name or subject, first name or organization name, list of contents or provocation?
I haven't seen any data specifically about this. I feel like I might have to go and talk to Rally, who do the M&R benchmarks, because they do quite a lot of work in email. Again, this is just testing, right? And I also think kind of one of the things that I see very often is that quite well-established organizations sometimes feel like you have to send like an email that's just from your organization name, and it has to be really formal, and you have to say this is our November newsletter. But often those are assumptions. And I think that's where that A/B testing comes from. And if I even think about like myself as a supporter, I get a couple of newsletters like where I wish they'd be a bit less formal, where I wish that they would test subject lines that were like maybe provoked a little bit, or were created that intrigue, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, same. I'm trying to figure out, like, because I have I'm signed up to so many newsletters. I scroll on my phone and just trying to think of like, when would I open an email? And I think for me, at least for me personally, it's if I see a first name, but also the organization name. So if I would see something like Valerie, Media Trust, at least I know it has a personal touch, but I also know where it's coming from. So yeah, so I think it's just testing.
Yeah.
So Rachel is saying, we send grants and regulation info and DEFRA news, which is essential, but also case studies, blogs, events that are regional. What do you think about dividing these up more? So I guess dividing
kind of like into almost like types of news, like the emails. I think that's the first thing that kind of came to my mind, is that you could almost have like different editions that people could sign up for, and I think that could be really interesting. If you wanted to kind of keep it more central, I think testing, kind of splitting it up, I think could work really well. And what I think you could also do is, if you're worried, if let's say for example you're going to feature a case study or a blog, but there's another area of work that you really don't want people to miss out on, I'd consider making one thing, like one topic, kind of like the hero of the email, but then to make sure that you're kind of signposting, even just like with different buttons or like quite concise information towards the end of the email to direct them to different places.
Okay. So good question from the group. How do you get past the spam filter? Or do you know, are there certain words that like you already know it will make your email go to spam?
There are some like words that trigger spam filters. I think a lot of them are quite historical and come from like the early days of the internet, where there were all of those like very like the office style like chain mail things. And so it's kind of things like a lot of like you talk about like things are free or life-changing, but one of the things and I can upload a list kind of somewhere else, but one of the things that I think is often important to remember is that often urgent language can sometimes trip up spam filters as well, which obviously, if we're running kind of emergency appeals and things, are important. But in terms of like how can you make sure that you stay out of the spam filter, I think that's where like your authentication kind of protocols are really important, and making sure that you've set up your DMARC record. Go and speak to, if this is not in your remit, everyone who's joining, like go and speak to your IT people, because it's basically something that you add to your domain. And from next year, Gmail wants us to kind of have those things turned on. So it's just like a lot of it's like the behind the scenes tech nitty gritty thing. And then I guess the other kind of most important thing to stay out of spam is to make sure that people don't mark you as spam. And that sounds really obvious, but rather make it easier for people to unsubscribe, because when someone marks you as spam, that's like a little black mark against your domain forever. They don't go away. And so it's rather better to let people leave. And that kind of feeds into that kind of like list cleaning thing as well.
Interesting. I actually there's one newsletter I've tried to unsubscribe and it's just not working, and maybe now I will actually spam them. So yeah, do make it easy for someone to unsubscribe if they don't want to be in your list. I actually personally also have been using MailChimp a lot for newsletters, and I think a lot of the audience members have. Someone was saying, I'm feeling quite uninspired by the templates in MailChimp. Do you have any suggestions for like other softwares or like other sites to use instead of MailChimp?
In terms of kind of other platforms to use, design-wise, Flowdesk is really good, Campaign Monitor, but I sometimes think what we lack is like a bit of a resource to have a look at what other people are doing. And so there's this really great site called, I think it's called Really Great Emails or Really Good Emails. And it's just like a bank of all sorts of kind of emails and newsletters. And often you just kind of need to see how other people have formatted things to get a little bit of inspiration. I can see from someone in the chat, .digital. Yeah, I've worked with quite a few organizations that use that as well. And it's really intuitive. I think that's the main thing. You've just got to kind of, you want to find a platform that you feel kind of comfortable working with. I also think what we'll kind of see, there we go. Thank you, Jess, for really good emails in the chat. I think we'll see kind of over the next year, like the AI design capabilities within all of these platforms is going to get much better, much quicker. Like already you can see in MailChimp, they've like got the classic builder, but their new builder is all about kind of pulling in design elements from your website and different places. And I think it'll help kind of make the inspiration just flow a little easier.
Okay, definitely good. I will definitely check it out. Going back to what you actually put into your newsletter, I think we had a bit of conversation around length is difficult, trying to keep it short, but then you also want to communicate so much. Then topic-wise, would you say, if someone is asking, would you really keep a newsletter to one topic and then maybe rather frequently send out newsletters? Or is it okay to mix it up and have different topics in one newsletter?
This is hard because again, like this is terrible. I always feel so bad when I do these things. So I'm like, this is really difficult. Because it is about like your audience and testing. I think if you have been sending mega multi-topic emails, monthly newsletters for ages, I want your next thing to be to go and test a single topic, because it really does kind of laser focus people. And I also think that you can sometimes, if it's single topic, talk about that topic in more depth than you would have been able to if it was like squished in kind of between 5 other things. But I'm looking in the chat as well, Sophie's saying, it always depends on like quality. And I think that's true. And also, again, what is the purpose kind of your newsletter? If if it is just about being a resource where there's loads of links and loads of things because that's how you use it, I think that's okay because it's meeting what the reader's expectations are. But if you've just been sending multi-topic newsletters because that's kind of what it's expected, I definitely say testing a topic because often it has much higher kind of click-through rates. And also I think this is where investing a little bit to make sure that kind of your UTM tracking and your Google Analytics and all that stuff's really set up properly, because then you can start to see how, you know, that single topic in email, potentially how that's impacting and how people are behaving kind of across your digital channels.
Okay, amazing. Well, it's 1:35, 36 actually, and we need to wrap this up. So I know there's still a few questions, but thanks everyone for joining us today. I think I would say from a personal view, I will take more than 3 things, but do testing. That's something I'll remember. Just test your audience. Stop calling them newsletters, and also letter first and news second. So thank you so much, Alex, for that insight. And yeah, we'll potentially share a few slides and documents with everyone later on. Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. And yeah, thanks everyone who joined. It was great to be here.